When it comes to investing and financial management, you may have heard countless pieces of advice. Seize trends, embrace innovation, and learn new technologies. All of these are correct, but they are only part of the story, and the less important part at that. Today, the classic book we are going to dive into, Same as Ever by Morgan Housel, presents us with a counterintuitive perspective. What truly determines your long-term wealth is not your ability to predict the future, but your ability to gain insights from history. The traps that led to people's failures in history, greed, panic, and overconfidence, still exist today and will continue to exist in the future. In the time ahead, we will follow in Housel's footsteps to identify those timeless wealth traps and unchanging rules for success. This video will not give you any stock tickers, but the wealth mindset framework it provides is invaluable. Now, a quick announcement. Starting today, if you click to download the Chishui music app at the bottom left of the video, you can listen to the in-depth analyses of all my recommended books for free. You can adjust the playback speed as you like, create custom playlists freely, and even listen with your phone locked. This way, you can have the warmest companionship during your commute, workouts, or before bed. Before we begin, let me ask you to think about a question. In this era that moves so fast it takes your breath away, what do you believe is the most valuable and core competitive advantage? Many might answer learning ability, innovation ability, or the ability to predict trends. Every day, we frantically scroll through news and read reports, fearing we might miss the next opportunity and be left behind by the times. We are obsessed with change, we praise change, and we also fear change. But today, Morgan Housel, the author of this book, invites us to hit the brakes and steer in a completely opposite direction. He tells us a truth that is so simple it seems like a fallacy, yet so profound it is eye-opening. In this world, the things that truly hold power and keep you invincible are precisely those that remain eternal. Does this sound counterintuitive? Don't rush to judgment. Let's first talk about how unreliable change really is. Do you still have a thick old photo album at home? In the era before smartphones, almost all the precious moments in our lives, graduations, family trips, a baby's first smile, were preserved in small boxes printed with a yellow logo. That yellow logo belonged to Kodak. At its peak, Kodak was almost synonymous with photography. It had over 140,000 employees, a market value of tens of billions of US dollars, and held thousands of technology patents. If you had made a prediction back then, you would have thought this company would last forever. But what happened? In just over a decade, the digital wave hit, and this business empire collapsed overnight, fading into obscurity. And do you remember Nokia? The indestructible phone that couldn't crack walnuts, still worked after being fished out of water, and lasted a week on a single charge? It was once the undisputed leader in the mobile phone industry, with a market share of over 40% at one point. Back then, we thought mobile phones should be like Nokia. But as we all know, Apple and Android later redefined what a mobile phone is, and Nokia, once a giant, became little more than a memory. Examples like Kodak and Nokia are countless in business history. They were once kings of their eras, synonymous with change and innovation, yet they were also fragile beyond imagination. Many of the buzzwords we throw around today, artificial intelligence, metaverse, blockchain, sound incredibly appealing, filled with futuristic imagination. But who can guarantee that in 10 or 20 years, they won't become the next Kodak or Nokia in our conversations? Focusing on change is like standing on a constantly spinning stage. You have to dance frantically to the rhythm just to avoid being thrown off. It's thrilling, but also exhausting and extremely dangerous, because the music could stop at any moment, and the stage could turn in a different direction. Predicting change is essentially a gamble with extremely low odds of winning. So, if chasing change is so unreliable, where should we anchor our attention? The answer lies in the things that never change. Morgan Housel uses a brilliant metaphor. If we imagine this complex world as a computer program, then all these rapidly evolving technologies, ever-shifting trends, and fluctuating economic cycles are just the user interface of this program, skins or apps that you can replace at any time. They are flashy and eye-catching, but they are not the essence. The true core of this program, the underlying code that determines all operational logic and has not been updated in thousands of years, is unchanging human nature. What is human nature? It is our greed, fear, jealousy, and laziness. It is our blind confidence in good times and collective panic in bad times. It is our tendency to be more interested in engaging stories than in dull data. It is our habit of overestimating what we can achieve in the short term while severely underestimating the compounding effect of long-term persistence. These things have never changed, from the Colosseums of ancient Rome to the stock exchanges of Wall Street today. The tools of technology change, the clothes we wear change, but the core, the operating system that drives our decisions, remains terrifyingly stable. Once you understand this, you will grasp the meaning of the compounding of wisdom. If you spend a week today learning the latest tips for using a software, that software might become obsolete in 2 years, and your knowledge will be reset to zero. However, if you spend a week today by reading history or biographies, gaining a deep understanding of how people slide into madness when faced with great temptation, that wisdom will still be useful in 10, 20, or even 50 years. It will help you make better judgments at every critical juncture in your life. Every insight you gain into human nature becomes a long-term deposit in your cognitive account, continuously generating interest of wisdom for you. This is the true power that can transcend time and overcome change. This leads us to the most important conclusion of this section. We must redefine what foresight means. In the past, we always thought of foresight people as geniuses who could perceive the future and predict trends, like the prophets in movies, who we believed could see things others couldn't. But this book tells us that true foresight is the opposite. It is not about predicting what new things will happen in the future, but about deeply understanding which old patterns will repeat themselves over and over again. So, friends, in the following content, we will not play the dangerous and futile game of guessing the future. Instead, we will act like seasoned detectives, searching for recurring clues of human nature in history and reality to see through the unchanging underlying code of this world. In the next section, we will explore the two most powerful forces driving this world: greed and fear. In the previous section, we discussed that human nature is the unchanging underlying code of the world. Within this complex and ancient code, there are two lines of instructions with the highest authority and the greatest power. Almost all of our actions can ultimately be traced back to them. One is called greed, and the other is fear. If we compare human society to a huge symphony orchestra, then for thousands of years, the sounds of these two instruments have always been the loudest and most prominent. The music they play together is sometimes resoundingly passionate, driving people to madness. Sometimes it is eerily low, plunging people into despair. This is the market cycle we witness, the historical cycle we experience, and the internal battle within each of us. Let's first talk about greed, the concertmaster violinist. This melody is full of temptation and magic. Let's turn back the clock to around 400 years ago, to the Netherlands. At that time, the Netherlands was the world's trade center and extremely wealthy. A flower imported from Turkey, the tulip, suddenly became the most fashionable luxury among the upper class. Some speculators realized they could make money from this, so they began hoarding tulips to drive up prices. Soon, the price of a rare tulip bulb exceeded the annual salary of a skilled craftsman by several times. This news spread through the Netherlands like a virus, driving everyone into a frenzy. Imagine this scenario. You are an ordinary shoemaker, and your neighbor, the carpenter, bought a few rotten onion bulbs, as tulip bulbs were mocked, last winter. And this spring he sold them and bought a big house with a garden. What would you think? Wouldn't you feel like the biggest fool in the world for working so hard making shoes? As a result, almost all Dutch people were drawn into this mania. Farmers sold their land, workers mortgaged their tools, and nobles sold their manors, all to exchange their money for tulip purchase contracts. At the height of the frenzy, a top-tier tulip variety called Semper Augustus could be traded for a luxury mansion in the center of Amsterdam, plus a carriage and 2 horses. People weren't even trading real bulbs anymore, just futures contracts. You see, in this madness, did it matter whether tulips smelled good or looked nice? Not at all. Tulips had become just a prop. What drove people was that primitive, uncontrollable impulse: greed. I want more. I can't be worse off than my neighbor. I don't want to miss this chance to make it big overnight. Greed is the fuel for social progress. It motivates us to invent, create, and forge ahead. It makes us want to live a better life. But greed without a break is the spark that ignites a disaster. As we all know, the tulip bubble eventually burst. Countless people lost everything overnight, and the entire Dutch economy regressed by several years. Does this 400-year-old story sound familiar? Replace the word tulips with real estate in the US in 2008, or with certain cryptocurrencies or concept stocks in recent years, and you'll find the script is nearly identical. The technology changes, the location changes, and the target of speculation changes. But the unchanging core, humanity's collective irrationality in the face of great temptation, remains the same as ever. Having talked about greed, let's now turn to the equally loud Mr. Fear in the orchestra. It plays the cello, its sound deep and oppressive, capable of dragging people into an ice cellar in an instant. If greed is the hand that pushes us toward the cliff at the top of the market, then fear is the foot that kicks us off the cliff at the bottom of the market. Let's bring the timeline closer back to 2008, a year many of us experienced firsthand. That year, Lehman Brothers collapsed, and a financial tsunami swept the globe. Every time you turned on the TV, all you heard was bad news. When you opened your stock account, what showed 1 million yesterday was down to 800,000 today, 500,000 a week later, and maybe only 300,000 a month later. Wouldn't there be a voice screaming in your head, "Run! Sell quickly. If you don't run, you'll lose everything." That voice is fear. Fear is a survival alarm engraved in our genes. In ancient times, when our ancestors heard an unusual sound in the forest, those who ran first survived, while those who wanted to move closer to check were eliminated. So we are born risk-averse. This ancient instinct has protected us countless times in life, but in the modern world of investing, it often does us more harm than good. When the market is in agony, stock prices fall to rock bottom, and everyone is fleeing in a panic, the greatest danger has usually passed. Yet because of fear, you sell all your assets at 5 a.m., the darkest hour, and thus perfectly miss the first ray of sunlight when the sun rises at 6 a.m. Countless data prove that after every major market crash in history, a huge rebound and a long-term bull market have followed. But most people fall during the darkness before dawn. And what kills them is not the market, but the ancient and powerful fear within their hearts. So you see the irony. At the peak of the market, when greed overwhelms everything, our greatest risk is being too brave. At the bottom of the market, when fear shrouds everything, our greatest risk is instead being not brave enough. In fact, every day, a tug-of-war between greed and fear plays out in the entire financial market, and even in each of our hearts. When greed gains the upper hand, the rope moves toward a bull market and optimism, and everyone talks about dreams and aspirations. When fear exerts its strength, the rope is pulled toward a bear market and pessimism, and everyone discusses risks and survival. So what should we do? Are we just going to be like a blade of grass, tossed back and forth by these two forces? Of course not. This book tells us that a mature investor, a wise decision-maker in life, does not aim to eliminate greed or fear, because that is impossible. Instead, their goal is to clearly see this tug-of-war. When the market is in a frenzy, people around you are making money, and you feel jealous and anxious, unable to resist the urge to jump in, you should be able to say to yourself, "Oh, so Mr. Greed has started playing his tune." When the market plummets, your account shrinks, and you feel panicked and desperate, wanting to sell all your holdings and exit, you should be able to remind yourself, "Listen, that's the sound of Mr. Fear's cello." This kind of seeing and awareness alone can create a precious buffer zone between you and your primitive impulses, and all rational decisions are born from this. This is the first and most important mindset we need to master, recognizing and harnessing the eternal dual engines within us. In the next section, we'll talk about another equally powerful but far more hidden code of human nature, the power of stories. We just talked about these two hard-hitting emotional engines, greed and fear. But have you ever wondered what ignites these engines and equips them with a navigation system? If greed and fear are the bullets, then who is the finger that pulls the trigger? The answer is what we'll discuss in this section, the most powerful yet easily overlooked force in human nature. Stories. You might find this strange. Aren't stories just for kids before bed? How much power can they have? Don't rush to judge. After hearing what I have to say, you may realize that each of us actually lives in stories woven by ourselves and others, and our lives are largely determined by which stories we choose to believe. Let's start with a thought experiment. Suppose you're planning to buy a car. The salesperson for brand A pulls you aside and rambles on about the car's technical specifications. Meanwhile, the salesperson for brand B doesn't mention any specs at all. Instead, they tell you a true story about an owner. A father drove this car, took his family on a journey through thousands of kilometers of uninhabited land to find a legendary field of stars, and along the way, this car was their most reliable companion, carrying the family's laughter and dreams. Now, tell me, which one would move you more? Most people would choose the latter. Why? Because our brains are not naturally designed to understand data spreadsheets. Over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, our ancestors relied on stories to pass on information, unite tribes, and distinguish friends from enemies. A good story can bypass the rational defenses of our brains and speak directly to our deepest emotions. Stories are the true universal language of the human world. Data may convince people, but only stories can inspire people, and our final decisions often stem from this. This truth is fully reflected in the world of investing. A listed company will release a financial report that's hundreds of pages long, filled with dense numbers. Is this important? Of course. But most investors won't even read it. What do they care more about? Does the company's founder have a legendary entrepreneurial story? Is the company telling a grand story about changing the world with AI? When a story is touching and imaginative enough, a loss-making financial report becomes a strategic loss. A distant dream becomes a future dream multiple, and those dull numbers become mere embellishments to the story. You see, in the capital market, facts and data are often just supporting roles. Stories are the true protagonists. That's why Morgan Housel puts forward a brilliant view in this book. The economy and the market are essentially a super large storytelling session. Think about it carefully. What is a bull market? The essence of a bull market is not a bunch of K-line charts moving upward, but an entire society believing in and spreading the same positive growth story. Because everyone believes this story, people are willing to invest and consume, and thus the story becomes a reality. What about a bear market? It's when that beautiful growth story falls apart and develops flaws, or when a more terrifying recession story emerges, such as a war, a pandemic, or a financial crisis. When this pessimistic story starts to spread, people cling tightly to their money out of fear, stopping consumption and investment, and thus the pessimistic story also becomes a reality. We often think that the state of the economy determines which stories we tell, but the truth is often the opposite. It is the stories we choose to believe in and spread that ultimately determine the state of the economy. The market value of a company works the same way. Why do some companies have terrifyingly high market values even though they're still losing money? Because they're not selling their present, they're selling their future. Their stock price does not reflect their current ability to make money, but the price the entire market is willing to pay for their story of becoming an industry leader in the future. When you buy their stock, you're not buying an asset, you're buying a ticket to that story, betting that the ending will be as wonderful as the founder claims. Now that we know stories are so powerful enough to distort reality, what should ordinary people like us do? Are we just going to be led by the nose by these stories? Of course not. The most important weapon this book gives us is awareness. First, we must realize that each of us views the world through an invisible story filter. This filter is shaped by your upbringing, education, and past life experiences. For example, what story were you taught about money as a child? Was it money is the root of all evil, or only those who dare to fight will win? Have you ever thought about how the default story about money in your mind affects your spending and investment decisions today? Seeing it is the first step toward change. Second, when you're on the receiving end of information, you need to learn to analyze the story. When a friend recommends a risk-free, sure-profit investment opportunity to you, or a financial influencer tells you, a certain sector is the main trend of the next era, you need to learn to ask yourself these questions. What is the core of this story? Is it exploiting my greed or selling my anxiety? What is the storyteller's motive? Do they want to help me or make money from me? If I choose to believe this story, what's the best possible outcome? What's the worst? Can I bear that worst-case scenario? You see, we're not asking you to become a robot that rejects all stories. Human beings need stories to give meaning and motivation to life. What we need to do is strive to be a sober reader. We should be able to appreciate the brilliance of a story, but also see through its structure. We can be moved by a story, but our final decisions must always return to the track of facts and logic. To move freely between stories and reality, able to immerse yourself in the story yet step out of it when needed, is a supreme form of wisdom. This wisdom serves as our strongest armor for protection in an uncertain world. Now that we've seen through the power of stories, we must turn to a tougher topic: the risks you can never calculate and the unexpected events that can strike at any moment. We talked about stories in the previous section. So, what's the most dangerous story in the world? It's the kind that ends with, "and they lived happily ever after." Such stories omit the most crucial character in real life: the unexpected. In the real world, the unexpected is the eternal protagonist. It arrives unannounced and can rewrite your entire script in an instant. In this section, we'll face this unsettling yet unavoidable topic head-on: risk and the black swan events you can never anticipate. There's a phrase called the elephant in the room. It refers to a huge elephant standing plainly in a room, yet everyone pretends not to see it and chooses collective silence. This sounds absurd, but it's exactly how human society most often responds to major risks. Let's zoom out the lens of history. On the eve of World War I, Europe was enjoying decades of peace and prosperity. People at the time widely believed that large-scale, brutal wars would never happen again. Yet the elephant in the room, the intricate military alliances between countries and the escalating arms race, was standing there plainly, but almost everyone chose to ignore it. It wasn't until the shot fired in Sarajevo that this elephant suddenly charged, trampling Europe's prosperity to pieces. Why does this happen? Because our brains are naturally averse to risk and crave stability. We always believe, what is true today will be true tomorrow. To maintain inner peace, we subconsciously filter out disturbing information and rationalize obvious dangers. This is a form of psychological self-protection, but it leaves us as defenseless as infants when real risks strike. Not only do we pretend not to see risks, worse still, we don't even understand how risks operate. Here, we must tell the tragic story of a turkey, proposed by investment thinker Nassim Taleb. From the day it was born, this turkey was raised by a very kind farmer, day in and day out, rain or shine. As a turkey with thoughts and a grasp of data, it began to build its own risk model. It observed for 1,000 days, and over those 1,000 days, the kind human brought it food every single day. Its database had no negative records. So the turkey concluded, "This human is my guardian. They will always be this kind to me." On the morning of the 1,001st day, its confidence reached its peak. Yet that afternoon, something unexpected happened, because it was Thanksgiving. This story is both ridiculous and tragic, but when it comes to facing risks in life and investing, almost all of us are this turkey. We look at a 5-year bull market and infer it will continue for another 5 years. We use limited, stable data from the past to linearly predict a future full of surprises, completely ignoring extreme events that can upend all past data in one go, what we often call black swans. When a person jumps from the 50th floor of a building, as they pass the 20th floor, they might say to themselves, "So far, so good." This is how most of us manage risk. We mistakenly equate nothing bad has happened in the past with nothing bad will happen in the future. And this is precisely the root of all personal tragedies and financial disasters. After talking so much about risk and our inability to predict it, do you start to feel despair? Don't worry. This is where the book's greatest value and power lie. It tells us, the highest form of wisdom is not to predict risks, for you can never know when that black swan will appear, but to acknowledge your own ignorance and shift completely from predicting risks to managing risks. In other words, Stop trying to buy a crystal ball that predicts the weather. That's what charlatans do. Instead, build yourself a Noah's Ark that is strong and sturdy enough, so that whether it's a light drizzle or a once-in-a-century flood, you can stay safe and sound. What exactly makes up this Noah's Ark? The book offers us several simple yet crucial pieces of advice. Maintain an adequate safety cushion, that is, emergency funds. It's like the airbag in a car. You don't notice it normally, but it can save your life in a critical moment. In the financial world, cash is your airbag. It lets you stay calm and dignified when the market crashes or you unexpectedly lose your job. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. We've heard this since childhood, but very few people actually follow it. Diversified investment means you give up the possibility of maximizing returns, but in exchange, you gain the right to never be completely eliminated. Respect leverage and stay away from debt that makes you lose control. Leverage, in plain terms, is borrowing money to invest. It's like installing a nitrous oxide booster in your life's race car. When the weather is good, it lets you speed ahead. But if you hit even a small pebble, it will make you crash harder than anyone else, leaving you with no chance to start over. You see, the wisdom of risk management is not at all glamorous. It has no mystery of predicting the future. It's just common sense, like a grandmother's nagging. Yet it's precisely this most ordinary common sense that serves as our strongest armor against a world full of surprises. Only with this armor do we gain the right to talk about the next step, building long-term advantages. Next, let's discuss how, after seeing through human nature and risks, we can construct our own set of unchanging survival rules. In the previous section, we talked about how to forge a strong armor to defend against an unpredictable world. But armor alone can only ensure we aren't defeated. To win the game of life, we also need to pick up our own weapons. So, what is our strongest weapon? One that lets us navigate cycles and build true long-term advantages. That's the survival rule we'll explore in this section. The first rule we'll discuss sounds the simplest and most boring, yet it's the most fearsome and hardest to imitate weapon of all successful people. This weapon is called patience. We all know Warren Buffett is the Oracle of Omaha, and 99% of his wealth was accumulated after he turned 50. We all want to learn his Midas touch for investing, yet we often overlook his most powerful trait, that unshakable patience of sitting and waiting day in and day out for decades. In today's era that chases speed, this patience is almost a superpower that goes against human nature. Let me use an analogy to help you understand. Anyone who has grown mozo bamboo knows a strange phenomenon. You water and fertilize it for 4 years, yet it barely grows above the ground. You might even doubt if you've planted a piece of rotten wood. These 4 years are the greatest test of human nature. 99% of people would probably give up halfway. But what they don't know is that during these 4 years, the bamboo's roots are spreading wildly underground for hundreds of meters, accumulating energy for its future growth spurt. When the time comes in the 5th year, it will grow into a towering bamboo forest dozens of meters tall in just a few weeks. Friends, the accumulation of wealth, the growth of knowledge, and the improvement of abilities are essentially a game of growing mozo bamboo, following the law of compounding. And the magic of compounding lies precisely in that long, boring phase of rooting underground. During this phase, you see no immediate returns. All your efforts seem to disappear like a stone thrown into the sea. That's why we all know compounding is the 8th wonder of the world. Yet few people in reality can truly enjoy its fruits, because we lack patience, always wanting to sow today and harvest tomorrow. Thus, in an era where everyone pursues instant gratification and overnight success, patience has become the scarcest resource. When you can truly understand the value of time and calmly accept that long rooting phase, you will have built a moat that ordinary people can never match. While others are scrambling to catch fish with their hands, you hold the longest fishing rod. Now that we have this patience fishing rod, let's move on to the second rule, which is about the strategy we should use to fish. This rule is, good enough is far better than the optimal solution. What does this mean? Let's take an example from life. Every January 1st, many people set themselves a perfectly flawless fitness plan. Work out for 2 hours every day and strictly cut out all junk food. Is this plan perfect? Absolutely. It's the optimal solution. But what happens? Most people can't stick to it for even a week. Because it's too perfect, so perfect that it's inhumane, leaving no room for accidents in real life. As long as you fail to follow it even once, you'll feel overwhelming frustration and then give up completely. You see, a theoretical, optimal solution often leads to the worst outcome in reality because it's unsustainable. Investing is no different. Many people spend their entire lives searching for the optimal investment strategy, hoping to find a perfect formula that lets them always buy at the lowest point and sell at the highest. But more often than not, they end up losing all their principal in constant tinkering, chasing rallies and selling in panics. In contrast, those who truly navigate bull and bear markets and make money are often the ones using strategies that seem a bit clumsy, a bit silly, like the monthly index fund systematic investment plan. We've all heard 100 times monthly index fund dollar cost averaging. Is this strategy perfect? Not at all. But it has one invaluable advantage. It's simple enough, good enough to implement, and only requires long-term persistence like a robot. A good enough strategy that you can stick to for 30 years will ultimately yield returns that crush a perfect strategy you only stick to for 3 months. So, stop searching for the elusive holy grail of investing. Instead, ask yourself, what kind of investing and saving habits allow you to sleep soundly, unafraid of market crashes? That good enough strategy, one that makes you comfortable and fits seamlessly into your life, is the optimal solution for you. This leads us to the final and most fundamental survival rule of this section. The essence of long-termism is staying alive. We always talk about being long-termists, but many people mistakenly equate long-termism with gritting it out and holding on no matter what. This only scratches the surface. Morgan Housel tells us that the true core of long-termism boils down to one word: survival. Investing, or rather our entire lives, is not like a 100-meter sprint. It's more like an ultramarathon. In this race, your top priority is only one thing: ensuring you never have to drop out midway due to unexpected events. What counts as dropping out? In investing, it means losing all your money in a single crash because you used excessive leverage. In life, it means ruining your career, family, or reputation with an impulsive decision. And more drastically, it means collapsing in poor health after long-term overwork in exchange for short-term success. That is the most complete form of dropping out. The magic of compounding can only unleash its exponential power over a sufficiently long timeline. And the prerequisite for all this is, you must stay in the game, you must survive, and remain at the table. Once you're out, this game has nothing to do with you anymore. Therefore, what all investment masters and life-wise men repeatedly emphasize is actually this simple truth: control risks before pursuing returns. Solidify your defense before thinking about offense. Always leave yourself room to maneuver, and never put yourself in a situation where there's no way back. Patience lets you wait for the bloom of compounding. A good enough strategy lets you persist with ease, and the bottom line mindset of survival ensures you always have the right to wait for that bloom to come. This is the iron triangle that builds unshakable advantages. Well, by now, our sharing of Same as Ever is drawing to a close. If we were to summarize the core wisdom of this book in the simplest words, it would be 2 characters: subtraction. The era we live in is always encouraging us to do addition. Learn more skills, acquire more information, chase more goals. Yet along with this, life becomes increasingly complicated, and our hearts grow more anxious. This book, however, teaches us exactly how to do subtraction. It tells us that we don't need to predict the future, we only need to respect risks. This subtracts a boundless arrogance. It tells us that we don't need to pursue the optimal strategy, we only need to stick to a good enough one. This subtracts an obsession with perfection. It tells us that we don't need to possess the whole world, we only need to hold on to control of our own time and protect the few people who love us around us. This subtracts an endless desire. When we eliminate these ever-changing, energy-draining variables one by one from the equation of life, what remains are the most simple, most stable, and most important things. May each of us have the courage to focus on what never changes and live a simple life. Thank you all for watching, and we'll meet again in our next book sharing.